Ambassador Sarah Chun stood before the largest emergency gathering in galactic history. The Grand Council chamber was gone, destroyed in the violence that had consumed the station. Instead, she spoke from a simple room aboard the human rescue vessel Hope, broadcasting to the scattered survivors of hundreds of civilizations. The beings who listened to her now were not the proud, confident species representatives who had laughed at her warnings a year ago. These were refugees, their worlds burning behind them, their civilizations in ruins. They watched her with desperate eyes, waiting for answers to questions they had never thought they would need to ask. "You want to know why this happened?" Sarah began, her voice steady despite the weight of what she was about to reveal. "You want to know how humanity knew it would happen? The answer is in our history, in files we have kept secret for 300 years. She activated the holographic display system. The room filled with images that made even hardened survivors gasp in horror. Human cities in flames, massive crowds of people tearing each other apart. Technological marvels reduced to smoking ruins. "This is Earth in the year 2157, Sarah said quietly. "This is what happened to humanity when we first discovered what you call interspecies competition." The images showed the early stages first. Humans from different cultural backgrounds competing in friendly games and contests. The excitement and celebration as different ethnic groups showed off their unique abilities. The pride as certain cultures began to dominate specific types of competitions. "It started exactly as it did with your species," Sarah explained. "Cultural exchange through competition. We thought it was bringing us together. For the first months, it seemed wonderful." A Regellian survivor, his mechanical enhancements damaged and sparking, spoke up. "But humans are all the same species. How could competition between human cultures cause such destruction?" Sarah's expression grew darker. "Because cultural competition triggers the same psychological responses as species competition. The human brain doesn't distinguish between us versus them based on genetics or culture or species. It only knows that there is an us and there is a them, and that we must be superior." The holographic display showed the progression. Human competitions that had started as cultural celebrations gradually became more intense, more serious, more important to the participants. Groups began to see losing not as disappointment but as fundamental proof of inferiority. "The pattern always follows the same stages," Sarah continued. "First, increase cooperation as groups work together toward competition goals. Then, behavioral modifications as losing groups try to enhance their abilities. Then, social fragmentation as groups begin to see others as enemies rather than neighbors." A surviving ethereal, her light dim and flickering, pulsed with confusion. "But surely intelligent beings can resist such primitive impulses." Sarah looked directly at the energy being. "You had millions of years of evolution beyond individual consciousness, and you still fragmented into competing individuals within months. Intelligence doesn't protect against this cascade. It makes it worse. The smarter a species is, the more creative they become at justifying their hatred." The display showed the darkest period of human history. Entire continents at war as different cultural groups tried to prove their superiority. The African Federation launching biological weapons against the European Union because African athletes had been defeated in the global Olympics. Asian nations cutting off trade and communications, declaring that their technological superiority made other humans obsolete. 93% of the human population died in the integration wars, Sarah said, her voice heavy with old grief. 7 billion people killed by other humans who had decided that being different meant being enemies. The numbers hit the assembled survivors like physical blows. Species that had prided themselves on their logic and wisdom realized they had fallen into the same trap that had nearly exterminated humanity. A young Drakmari warrior, one of the few who still followed the old honor codes, raised his hand. "How How did humanity survive? How did you stop the cascade once it had started? Sarah hesitated. This was the hardest part to explain, the secret that humanity had carried for 3 centuries. We developed the protocol, a set of psychological and social controls designed to prevent competitive thinking from overwhelming rational behavior. She activated another display. This one showed human settlements from the post-war period. Small communities surrounded by massive walls, not to keep enemies out, but to keep themselves in. Human children being raised in strictly controlled environments where competition of any kind was forbidden. For 50 years, we banned all forms of competition between humans, Sarah explained. No sports, no contests, no comparisons of any kind. Children were taught that differences in ability were natural and meaningless. Adults who showed competitive behavior were immediately isolated and treated. The survivors looked at the images with growing understanding and horror. The price of humanity's survival had been the suppression of one of their most fundamental drives. A Zephyrian survivor, his crystal body cracked and dim, asked, "But humans compete now. We have observed your sports and contests. How is this possible?" It took 200 years of careful conditioning to develop humans who could compete safely, Sarah replied. We had to literally evolve our psychological responses through selective breeding and neural conditioning. Modern humans are psychologically different from pre-war humans. We maintain emotional barriers that prevent competitive feelings from overwhelming our judgment. She showed them brain scans comparing pre-war and modern humans. The differences were stark. Modern humans had enhanced prefrontal cortex, development and modified amygdala responses. That allowed them to compete without triggering the cascade effect. Every human alive today is the descendant of survivors who proved they could resist the competitive cascade, Sarah continued. We are not naturally superior to your species. We are the traumatized remnants of a species that almost destroyed itself learning this lesson. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Humanity hadn't been paranoid or weak. They had been the only species that had already paid the ultimate price for understanding this. Psychological trapdog Dr. Marcus Webb stepped forward to address the technical questions. The competitive cascade exploits a fundamental flaw in sapient psychology, he explained. All intelligent species develop tribal instincts as part of their evolution. Competition between groups triggers these instincts and amplifies them beyond rational control. But why didn't you simply tell us this? Asked a Verdani scientist. Her plant-like form wilted with exhaustion. Sarah looked at the assembled survivors with sad understanding. Would you have believed us? A year ago, you saw humanity as primitive newcomers to galactic civilization. If we had told you that competition would destroy your advanced civilizations, would you have listened? The silence that followed was answer enough. We tried to warn you in the only way that might have worked, Sarah continued. We proposed the ban without explaining why, hoping you would trust our judgment. But your species' pride in your own superiority made that impossible. She activated a final display showing the current state of the galaxy. Hundreds of worlds had gone silent. Entire civilizations had collapsed into chaos. The great works of art, science, and philosophy that species had spent millions of years creating were reduced to ruins in a matter of months. The galaxy that existed a year ago is gone, Sarah said bluntly. Your great civilizations, your ancient wisdom, your technological marvels, most of it is lost forever. The beings who survived are the ones who proved capable of resisting the cascade, but they will never be the same as they were before. She looked around the room at the scattered survivors. Humanity offers you a choice. We can teach you the protocol. We can help you build new societies that can resist competitive thinking. But it will mean giving up much of what made your species unique. You will have to become more like us, scarred, cautious, forever aware of the darkness that lives in every sapient mind." The survivors looked at each other. Representatives of civilizations that had once spanned star systems, now reduced to small groups of refugees. They had seen what happened to those who tried to resist without help. The choice was clear: accept humanity's guidance or face extinction. One by one, they agreed to learn the protocol, to rebuild their societies under human supervision, to become students of the species they had once dismissed as inferior. Sarah watched them accept their new reality with a mixture of sadness and relief. The galaxy would survive, but it would be a smaller, humbler place. The age of great civilizations was over, replaced by the age of careful survival. "Welcome to the real galaxy," she said quietly. "The one where humanity learned the hard way that the greatest enemy of intelligent life is intelligence itself." The survivors began the long process of learning how to live with the knowledge that their own minds were their worst enemy. And in the background, human teachers prepared to share the painful wisdom that had cost their species 7 billion lives to learn. The galaxy had been humbled by its own success, saved only by the species that had already paid the ultimate price for understanding the darkness that lurks in every thinking mind. Admiral Marcus Rivera walked into the Defense Council chamber with steady steps. Around the massive table sat the most powerful military leaders in human space. General Hayes from the Marine Corps, Admiral Chun from the Fleet Command, Director Wash from Intelligence, and 8 others. Their faces all showed the same expression: controlled anger. "You've all seen the recording," Rivera said without sitting down. Captain Sarah Chun and 4 other female prisoners were executed in violation of galactic law. The Zephyrians broadcast it as a message to humanity. "Message received," General Hayes said grimly. "What's our response?" Rivera finally took his seat. "That depends on what you're willing to authorize. The Zephyrians think they know humans. They expect us to file protests with the Galactic Council, maybe increase military pressure along our borders." "They think we're soft, are we?" asked Admiral Chun. She was no relation to the murdered captain, but her jaw was set like steel. "Are we going to let them get away with this?" "The question," Rivera said slowly, "is how far we're willing to go. We can fight this war by galactic rules, or we can fight it by human rules. The Zephyrians have already chosen their path." Director Wash leaned forward. "What exactly are you suggesting, Marcus?" Rivera activated the holographic display in the center of the table. Star charts appeared, showing Zephyrian territory. Intelligence estimates they have 40 billion civilians across their empire. Their military follows a strict hierarchy based on bloodlines. They have cultural taboos about showing weakness or retreating. "We know all this," General Hayes said. "What's your point?" "My point is that we've been fighting them like they're humans. We use tactics that would work against us. But they're not human. They have different weaknesses, different fears, different breaking points." Rivera changed the display to show Zephyrian military structure. "They murdered Captain Chen because their culture says females shouldn't fight. They think this makes us weak. They don't understand human psychology at all." "Explain," Admiral Chen said. Rivera stood again and began pacing. "Humans are pack animals. We protect our own. When someone kills our pack members deliberately, especially those under protection, something switches off in our brains. We stop being civilized. We become hunters." The room was silent for a moment. Finally, Director Walsh spoke. "What are you recommending?" "Total mobilization. Every shipyard, every factory, every research facility. We don't just fight the Zephyrian military. We destroy their ability to make war completely. We make it so expensive for them that they never think about breaking galactic law again." General Hayes nodded slowly. The President will need to approve this level of mobilization. I spoke to her an hour ago, Rivera said. She's calling a joint session of Congress tomorrow. The authorization will pass. Rivera changed the display again. Now it showed industrial capacity charts. We can triple military production in 6 months if we convert civilian factories. Earth's population is ready for it. The other human worlds are asking what they can do to help. What about our allies? Asked Admiral Chun. The Centauri Federation, the trade union? They're nervous, Director Walsh admitted. The Centaurians called it a regrettable incident and asked for calm response. The trade union wants mediation through the Galactic Council. Rivera's face hardened. They can stay nervous. This isn't their fight anymore. The Zephyrians made it personal when they executed our people. The next few hours were spent planning. Military doctrine would be rewritten. New weapon systems would be fast-tracked for production. Most importantly, the rules of engagement were changing. I want psychological warfare specialists brought in, Rivera ordered. Find out what scares Zephyrians. What do they value most? What would hurt them the most to lose? Director Walsh made notes. I can have teams studying their culture within the week. Good. And I want our best interrogation experts. We're going to need information from prisoners. Are we still following the Galactic Conventions for prisoners? General Hayes asked carefully. Rivera was quiet for a moment. We'll follow the letter of the law. But if the Zephyrians can find creative interpretations, so can we. The meeting ended after midnight. As the others filed out, Admiral Chun stayed behind. Marcus, are you sure about this? Once we start down this path, there's no going back. Rivera looked at the star charts still glowing in the hologram. Sarah Chun was my student 8 years ago. Bright, dedicated, believed in doing the right thing. She surrendered because she trusted galactic law to protect her crew. He turned to face Admiral Chun. The Zephyrians executed her on camera to send us a message. Now we send one back. Within days, the transformation began. Civilian factories across Earth and the human colonies started converting to military production. Shipyards that had been building cargo vessels switched to warships. Research stations focused on developing new weapons. But the most important changes were happening in human psychology. The execution video had been shown on every news channel. Humans everywhere had seen Sarah Chun's last words, seeing her defiant stare into the camera as she faced death. Recruitment stations were overwhelmed with volunteers. People who had never considered military service were signing up. Engineers, doctors, scientists, all wanting to contribute to the war effort. The Zephyrians had intended to frighten humanity into submission. Instead, they had awakened something that had been sleeping. Admiral Rivera received reports from across human space. Production was exceeding all projections. New weapon designs were being tested and approved in record time. The military was growing faster than they could train new officers. Sir, his aide Colonel Williams reported, we're getting offers of help from unexpected sources. What kind of offers? Retired veterans coming back to service. Civilian tech companies offering military designs for free. Some colonies are volunteering their entire industrial output. Rivera nodded. This was what he had expected. The Zephyrians had made a fundamental error. They thought killing human women would show weakness. Instead, they had shown humanity something about itself. Humans could forgive many things. They could negotiate, compromise, even work with former enemies. But there were lines that should never be crossed. The Zephyrians had crossed one of those lines. Now they would learn the price. 3 months after the execution, Commander Vask was drinking victory wine in his quarters aboard Zephyrian flagship Dominance. The reptilian commander felt pleased with himself. The human response had been weak, just as he predicted. A few angry speeches, some increased patrol activity, nothing more. He was wrong. At that moment, a human stealth ship called Shadow hung invisible just 2 kilometers from his vessel. Captain James Park studied the flagship through advanced sensors. His crew had been tracking Vask for 6 weeks, learning his routines, his security procedures, his weaknesses. "Target confirmed," reported Lieutenant Kim from the sensor station. "Commander Vask is in his quarters, Section 7, Deck 12. Captain Park nodded. "Begin operation. Remember, we want him alive for questioning." The Shadow fired a single penetrator round, designed specifically for Zephyrian ship armor. It punched through the hull like paper and released a cloud of knockout gas into Vask's quarters. The Zephyrian commander collapsed before he could reach his alarm. Within minutes, human Special Forces soldiers were aboard the flagship. They moved through the corridors like ghosts, their advanced armor making them nearly invisible. The ship's crew never knew they were there. They found Vask unconscious and carried him back to their ship. By the time the Zephyrians discovered his missing presence, the humans were already jumping to their next destination. This was happening across the Zephyrian space. Every officer involved in Captain Chun's execution was being hunted. Not by large fleets or massive battles, but by small teams of specialists who studied their targets like predators stalking prey. Admiral Rivera watched the operations from Earth Defense Command. His war room had been redesigned with new displays showing every Zephyrian officer on their target list. Red markers showed those already captured or eliminated. The list was getting shorter every day. "Status report," he ordered. Colonel Williams stepped forward with a datapad. 15 targets captured alive, 8 eliminated during escape attempts, 6 still at large. The Zephyrians are starting to panic. Good. What about intelligence gathering? The captured officers are providing useful information. Director Walsh's teams have learned a lot about Zephyrian command structure and psychology. Rivera pulled up a file on his screen. What have we learned about their weaknesses? Williams consulted his notes. Several things, sir. They have an extreme fear of being seen as weak by lower-ranked soldiers. Their families hold significant political power. Most importantly, they believe capture is worse than death because it shows failure. Interesting. Are we exploiting this? Yes, sir. We're broadcasting recordings of captured Zephyrian officers begging for mercy. It's having a devastating effect on their military morale. Rivera smiled grimly. The Zephyrians thought they understood warfare, but they had never faced humans who were truly motivated. The execution of Captain Chun had done more than anger humanity. It had shown them that their enemy was capable of true evil. Meanwhile, on a Zephyrian prison world called Karak, something else was happening. Human intelligence had discovered that 12 other female prisoners from various species were being held there. The Zephyrians planned to execute them as well, following the example they had set with Captain Chun. Commander Sarah Torres of the Human Marine Corps had other plans. Torres studied the prison through her binoculars from a hidden position 2 kilometers away. The facility was heavily guarded, but human intelligence had provided detailed plans of the layout. More importantly, they had learned the guards' schedules and weaknesses. "Team leaders, report," she said into her communicator. "Alpha team ready," came the first response. "Charges placed on the main power station." "Beta team ready," said another voice. "Guard towers are marked for elimination." "Charlie team ready," reported the third. "Extraction vehicles in position." Torres checked her watch. In 30 seconds, the Zephyrians would learn what happened when humans decided to take prisoners back. The attack began with the power station, exploding in a brilliant flash. The prison went dark. Guard towers erupted in flames as precise missile strikes took them out. Zephyrian soldiers stumbled around in confusion as human marines poured into the facility. The fighting was brief and brutal. The Zephyrians were trained for conventional warfare, not for facing humans who fought like they had nothing to lose. Within 20 minutes, the prison was under human control. Torres found the female prisoners in the maximum security section. They were from different species: 2 Centaurians, 3 from the trade union, 4 others from smaller worlds. All had been captured while serving in support roles for their military forces. "You're safe now," Torres told them. "We're taking you home." One of the Centaurian prisoners, a blue-skinned woman with large eyes, stared at Torres in amazement. "You came for us? But we're not even human. The Zephyrians plan to execute you the same way they murdered our people," Torres replied. "That makes it our business." The rescue operation was broadcast across the galaxy. Other species watched in shock as humans fought their way into a heavily defended prison just to save prisoners, who weren't even their own people. It was something none of them had ever seen before. Back on Earth, Admiral Rivera received the mission report with satisfaction. But he knew this was just the beginning. The Zephyrians had shown they would kill prisoners who surrendered under galactic protection. Now humanity would show them what that decision cost. "Call Williams," he said. "Prepare the next phase. I want every Zephyrian military facility within 50 light years of human space mapped and analyzed." "For what purpose, sir?" "Target practice," Rivera said coldly. "The Zephyrians wanted to send us a message. Now we send one back. Every military base, every supply depot, every command center. We're going to systematically destroy their ability to make war." Williams looked concerned. "Sir, that's a significant escalation. The Galactic Council will." "The Galactic Council did nothing when the Zephyrians executed our prisoners," Rivera cut him off. "They issued a formal protest and asked for dialogue. Meanwhile, more prisoners were scheduled for execution." He stood up and walked to the star chart. "We tried their way. Now we do it our way." The hunt was expanding. It was no longer just about capturing the officers who had been directly involved in the executions. Now, it was about sending a clear message to the entire Zephyrian hegemony. There were consequences for crossing certain lines. Human forces began attacking Zephyrian positions with new tactics that confused and terrified their enemies. Instead of trying to hold territory, they struck fast and disappeared. Instead of fighting fair battles, they used every advantage technology and psychology could provide. The Zephyrians began to realize they had made a terrible mistake. They had thought they were fighting a war against a weaker species. Instead, they had awakened something that was systematically hunting them across the galaxy, and the humans were just getting started. High Admiral Sethrak of the Zephyrian hegemony stood before his war council with growing anger. The humans were making his military look like fools. In 6 months, they had captured or killed 30 senior officers, destroyed 15 major military installations, and rescued prisoners from 3 supposedly secure facilities. "Enough," he hissed to his assembled commanders. "If the humans want to abandon civilized warfare, we will show them what total war truly means." General Krex, his chief of ground forces, nodded eagerly. "The human civilian colonies are poorly defended. We could strike at their population centers." "Do it," Sethrak ordered. "Target their families, their children, their elderly. Show them that their aggression has consequences." It was the second worst decision the Zephyrians could have made. The first had been executing Captain Chun. The attack came without warning. Zephyrian forces struck the agricultural colony of Haven's Rest, a peaceful world where 30,000 humans grew food for other colonies. The defenders were a small security force with light weapons. They fought bravely, but were overwhelmed in hours. The Zephyrians made the same mistake they had made before. They broadcast their victory, showing images of burning farms and captured civilians. They thought this would break human morale. Instead, it broke something else entirely: Admiral Rivera received the news in his office at Earth Defense Command. He watched the footage in complete silence. Colonel Williams stood nearby, afraid to speak. When the recording ended, Rivera's face had become something terrible to see. "Get me President Martinez," he said quietly. "Sir." "She's in session with Congress. Get her now." Within minutes, the president was on the secure channel. "Marcus, I've seen the reports." "What do you need?" "Everything," Rivera said. "Full authorization for unrestricted warfare. No more rules, no more limitations, no more mercy." There was silence on the channel. Finally, the president spoke. "Are you certain this is the path we want to take? They just murdered 30,000 civilians, including children. They broadcast it as entertainment. The time for restraint is over. You have full authorization," the president said. "God help us all." Rivera turned to Colonel Williams. "Activate Protocol 7. Contact every fleet commander, every special forces unit, every intelligence operation. As of now, we are at total war with the Zephyrian hegemony." Protocol 7 was something that had been planned but never used. It meant the complete destruction of enemy war-making capability by any means necessary. It meant treating the Zephyrians not as fellow civilized beings, but as a threat to human survival that had to be eliminated. The change was immediate and devastating. Human fleets that had been fighting defensive actions suddenly went on the attack. But these weren't the careful, limited strikes of before. These were campaigns designed to cause maximum damage with minimum human losses. Captain Lisa Chang commanded the human battleship Retribution as it approached the Zephyrian military world of Korvax Prime. Her fleet carried new weapons that had been rushed into production, biological agents designed specifically for Zephyrian physiology. Target confirmed, reported her tactical officer. 12 million Zephyrian military personnel on planet. No civilian populations. Deploy the bioweapons, Chang ordered. The weapons weren't lethal, but they were worse. They caused a wasting sickness that left Zephyrians alive but unable to fight. The affected soldiers would suffer for months before recovering, if they ever did. It was legal under galactic law because it didn't cause death, but it was something no civilized species had ever used before. Within days, Korvax Prime was out of the war. 12 million Zephyrian soldiers lay helpless in their barracks, too sick to even stand. But that was just one operation among hundreds. Human forces struck everywhere at once, using tactics that horrified even their own allies. On the Zephyrian supply world of Nexus, human special forces poisoned the water supply with chemicals that caused temporary paralysis. Millions of Zephyrian workers simply collapsed where they stood. The world's entire industrial output stopped overnight. At the Zephyrian fleet base of Mordak Station, humans used sonic weapons that exploited Zephyrian hearing sensitivity. The noise was designed to cause excruciating pain to reptilian ears. Zephyrian crews abandoned their ships rather than endure the torture. Across their empire, Zephyrians began to realize that humanity was fighting a different kind of war. Every attack was designed to cause maximum psychological impact while technically staying within galactic law. The humans had studied Zephyrian biology and culture, then created weapons designed specifically to exploit their weaknesses. Admiral Sethric watched his empire crumble from his command ship in deep space. In 3 months, humanity had destroyed or disabled 60% of Zephyrian military capability. They did it without massive fleet battles or huge casualties. Instead, they used precision strikes that left his forces helpless and terrified. "Sir," reported his intelligence chief, "we're receiving surrender requests from 17 military commanders. They say their forces cannot continue fighting." "Surrender is not permitted," Sethrak hissed. "Execute any officer who suggests it." But it was too late. The Zephyrian military was collapsing not from losses, but from fear. Human psychological warfare had convinced most Zephyrian soldiers that capture was inevitable and that humans would use them for horrible experiments. Worse, the humans had begun broadcasting recordings of captured Zephyrian officers confessing their war crimes. They played these recordings on every communication channel, showing proud Zephyrian commanders reduced to broken beings who begged for mercy. The Galactic Council called emergency sessions to try to stop the war, but humanity ignored them completely. Ambassador Harrison delivered humanity's response to the assembled representatives. The Zephyrian hegemony chose to execute prisoners under the protection of galactic law, he said coldly. They chose to attack civilian populations. They chose to break every rule of civilized warfare. Now, they face the consequences of those choices. But surely there must be limits, pleaded the Centaurian representative. This level of destruction should have been considered before they murdered our people, Harrison interrupted. Humanity will accept nothing less than complete surrender and full accountability for war crimes. The other species watched in growing fear. They had thought humans were just another aggressive, but ultimately reasonable species. Now they saw something else entirely, a civilization that could wage war with scientific precision and limitless determination when sufficiently provoked. On Earth, public support for the war effort remained at nearly 100%. Every human had seen the footage from Haven's Rest. Every human understood that the Zephyrians had chosen to target children and elderly civilians. The anger that drove humanity's military was shared by their entire species. Admiral Rivara stood in his war room, watching status reports pour in from across Zephyrian space. Red markers showed destroyed facilities. Yellow markers showed disabled forces. Green markers showed human victories. The map was becoming dominated by human colors. Sir, Colonel Williams reported, intelligence indicates the Zephyrian government is considering surrender terms. What terms? Complete withdrawal from all contested systems, full reparations for damages, and trial of war criminals by Galactic Court. Rivera shook his head. Not enough, sir. They murdered Captain Chun and her crew in cold blood. They massacred 30,000 civilians at Haven's Rest. They violated every principle of civilized warfare. Rivera turned to face Williams. They wanted total war. Now they have it. We accept nothing less than unconditional surrender and complete dismantlement of their military. The war would end soon, but not the way the Zephyrians had expected. They had thought they could frighten humanity into submission. Instead, they had learned what humanity became when all restraint was removed. They would remember that lesson for generations to come. High Admiral Sethrak entered the surrender chamber aboard the neutral space station Unity with his remaining officers. The once proud leader of the Zephyrian hegemony moved slowly, his scales dulled by stress and defeat. Across the polished table sat Admiral Rivera and the human delegation, their faces cold as winter stone. We come to discuss terms, Sethrak said in broken galactic standard. His voice held none of its former authority. There are no terms to discuss, Rivera replied flatly. Only surrender conditions to accept. Around them, representatives from dozens of galactic species watched in tense silence. The Centauri ambassador shifted nervously in his chair. The trade union delegate had stopped taking notes. Everyone understood they were witnessing the end of the Zephyrian hegemony as a major power. Rivera activated a holographic display showing the current state of Zephyrian space. Red zones marked areas under human control. Yellow zones showed disabled Zephyrian forces. Only a few green areas remained under Zephyrian command. Your military is finished, Rivera stated. 87% of your fleet is destroyed or captured. Your major military installations are gone. Your supply chains are broken. Your soldiers are either dead, sick, or surrendering. He leaned forward. You have nothing left to bargain with. Sethrak's forked tongue flicked out nervously. What do you want? Rivara slid a datapad across the table. Read it. The Zephyrian Admiral's eyes widened as he scanned the document. This is the dissolution of our empire. Yes, Rivara said without emotion. The terms were harsh beyond anything seen in galactic history. Complete military disarmament. Trial of war criminals by human courts. Occupation of all major Zephyrian worlds for 50 years. Payment of massive reparations. Most devastating of all, the permanent prohibition on Zephyrian military forces, larger than local police units. You cannot expect us to accept this, protested General Krex, who had ordered the attack on Haven's Rest. It would end our civilization. Rivera turned his cold gaze on the general. You should have thought about that before you murdered 30,000 human civilians. Before you executed prisoners who had surrendered under galactic protection. The Centauri ambassador finally spoke. Admiral Rivera, surely these terms are excessive. Perhaps a negotiated settlement. There's no negotiation, Rivera cut him off. The Zephyrians chose to wage total war against humanity. Now they face total defeat. The terms are non-negotiable. Sethrak looked around the room desperately, seeking support from other species. He found only uncomfortable silence. The galaxy had watched humanity systematically destroy Zephyrian military power in 18 months. No one wanted to be next. And if we refuse? Sethrak asked weakly. Then, we continue until there are no Zephyrians left capable of holding weapons, Rivera replied. Your choice. The silence stretched for long minutes. Finally, Sethrak's shoulders slumped in defeat. We accept. The signing ceremony was brief and witnessed by the galaxy's major powers. As Sethrak pressed his claw to the surrender document, Rivera felt no satisfaction. Too many good people had died to reach this moment. Captain Sarah Chun would never see this victory. After the ceremony, Rivera walked to the observation deck of Unity Station. Colonel Williams joined him, looking out at the stars. It's over, Williams said. This war is over, Rivera corrected. But the consequences are just beginning. He was right. Word of humanity's victory spread quickly through civilized space. The species that had dismissed humans as newcomers now saw them as the galaxy's new dominant military power. Ambassadors began requesting meetings. Trade agreements were offered. Military alliances were proposed. On Earth, crowds celebrated in the streets. The war that had begun with such tragedy was finally over. But Admiral Rivera found no joy in the celebrations. He had seen what humanity became when pushed beyond its breaking point. It was something that worried him. A year later, Rivera stood at the memorial wall in Earth Defense Command headquarters. Carved into black marble were the names of every human who had died in the war. Captain Sarah Chun's name was at the top, along with her 4 crew members who had been executed with her. Sir? Colonel Williams approached carefully. The Galactic Council is requesting a meeting about the new defense agreements. Rivera nodded but didn't turn away from the wall. What do they want? Protection agreements, mostly. 17 species have requested human military assistance in their regional conflicts. They're offering substantial compensation. And what did you tell them? That they need to speak with you directly. Rivera finally turned from the memorial. Set up the meetings. But make it clear that humanity's protection comes with conditions. Any species under our defense umbrella follows our rules about prisoners of war. No exceptions. Over the following months, humanity's new role in the galaxy became clear. They were no longer the friendly newcomers seeking acceptance. They were the species. Others turned to when they needed problems solved. Permanently, the Mordak Rebellion. was crushed when human forces deployed the same biological weapons they had used on Korvax Prime. The rebel leaders surrendered within days rather than face months of debilitating sickness. When pirates began raiding trade union shipping, human hunter-killer squadrons eliminated them completely. No prisoners were taken, no negotiations were attempted. The pirates simply disappeared. Other species began to whisper about humanity's methods. They were effective, but they were also ruthless in ways that made older civilizations uncomfortable. Humans had proven they could wage war with a precision and determination that bordered on frightening. Rivara understood the fear. He had helped create the military machine that now dominated human space. But he also remembered Captain Chen's face as she looked into the camera, defiant even in the face of death. Some lines should never be crossed. 5 years after the war ended, Rivera retired from active service. He was given a hero ceremony and offered positions with defense contractors and political offices. He turned them all down. Instead, he accepted a teaching position at the Earth Defense Academy. His first lecture was always the same topic: the rules of war and why they mattered. War has rules for a reason, he would tell each new class of cadets. They separate civilization from barbarism. They protect the innocent and limit suffering. When those rules are broken, terrible things happen. He would show them recordings of the war, the execution of Captain Chun, the attack on Haven's Rest, the systematic destruction of Zephyrian military power. The Zephyrians learned what happens when you cross certain lines, he would conclude. They learned that humanity, when sufficiently provoked, can wage war with an efficiency that terrifies our enemies and concerns our allies. This is not something to celebrate. It is something to remember and to prevent from happening again. The students always listened in silence. They understood that their professor had helped create something powerful and terrible. They also understood that he was teaching them to be better than the enemy they might face. In the end, humanity's victory over the Zephyrian hegemony became a cautionary tale told throughout the galaxy. It was the story of what happened when a species chose to abandon the laws of civilized warfare. It was a reminder that some lines should never be crossed, and it was proof that humanity, despite their reputation for mercy and diplomacy, could become something far more dangerous when their fundamental principles were violated. The galaxy remembered. The galaxy learned. And the galaxy was very careful never to test humanity's limits again.